I gave a hint before that the eucalyptus tree was actually a great variety of trees rather than just one species. This is also a eucalyptus tree, and you can see that this tall straight trunk, which can rise to well over 200 feet in height, would actually give the sequoia and the giant redwood trees in the USA a run for the money in terms of height. Here we've got a tree bark that is almost like a rainbow colour. Here is what's called the ghost eucalyptus tree, and you can see why. You've got a very smooth branch and trunk there. Here's the red gum tree being another more common name for the eucalyptus. You can see there's all sorts of mottled effects there. Here's something you don't often see in Australia, but this is snow. And here is another variety of eucalyptus tree which has a trunk and roots that are more akin to our old friend the olive tree again. So these are not paintings, but they're close-up, unretouched photographs of two types of eucalyptus tree bark. Here you can see this beautiful orange and green and brown stripy effect, and here it looks like somebody's gone over it with a tin of camouflage paint. But what we're going to look at is this smooth ghost eucalyptus tree branch. Even in a bark as smooth and as apparently plain as this, there's all sorts of little humps and bumps and fissures and little bits of texture that you can root out without too much difficulty. This is called painting negatively, incidentally, where you paint dark areas and whatever you leave actually becomes the image you're trying to create. There we go. Perhaps just a hint of some trees or something in the background. Right, now I'm putting a very thin wash of burnt umber and raw sienna on the branch, and that just adds a very pale warm tone to the branch itself, and it's just enough to lose that stark whiteness off the paper. And don't worry, it looks a little bit dark at the moment, but I can assure you that's going to fade to a very subtle and warm tone when it dries off. Now next we move on to adding some little pock marks and blemishes on the branches, because even though they're almost white, you still want to create a little bit of texture, and this is an ideal way to do it. I'm using a strong mix of ultramarine blue and burnt umber, and similarly I'm using the same colour just to paint in that little leaf that's just fallen and lodged in the V of where the two branches split. And we're also going to use the same colours for this left hand thinner branch. You see there's quite a bit of dark texture on that. Now here I'm using the same colour in the front of the main branch, but what I'm going to do now, just like that, is just to blot out. You see the way I've blotted out that colour, but what it's done is left a ghosted pale brown, reddy brown image, which again adds a little bit of texture and character. Right, now if you can imagine my forearm and my fist to be the branch that we're painting this little blemish, I want to create the sense that the blemish is actually a slight hollow or a slight hole in the tree. Obviously the dark part on the inside of my fingers, that little circle I've created, is going to be the dark part, but notice the way the light is catching the right hand side of my fist and also just the top edge of my thumb, and it's those little light areas that you need to keep around both sides of that dark area to make it appear that that little blemish is actually raised up almost like a little crater on top of the branch. I've reinforced some of the colours here, the raw sienna and the light red here, a little bit more ultramarine here and there. I put this shadow on with light red and ultramarine, but biased slightly towards the light red, to give a nice strong shadow cast from this branch onto the main trunk, and similarly from that leaf trapped in the V of the trunk, casting the shadow onto the trunk there. Put a few more dark spots here and there just to emphasize these little hollows in the tree, and that's it really. Right, now I'm just going to finish off this lesson by covering the sponging effect that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to use this photograph and just a few of the top branches of this eucalyptus tree. I've drawn out a few branches here that roughly replicate part of this area here. It's only to show how easy this is to use the sponge and to create tree foliage. Now the first thing I've done is actually to squeeze out a fresh blob of lemon yellow paint, and also some ultramarine paint here, because the sponging effect really works best when you've got strong moist paint on the sponge. Now that's a nice strong light green. It's a little bit fluorescent, so I'm going to take it down just a touch with some burnt umber, and the red that's in the burnt umber, you can see, we'll just dull it down slightly, but not too dull. It'll still appear quite bright on the picture, I promise you. So I'm just going to dip that in quite a bit, and because it's thick and because it's fresh, almost neat paint, it takes it up on the sponge, but it doesn't soak too much inside the fibres of the sponge and disappear. So all we're going to do now is to blot on top like that. Be confident and bold with this. You can always go over it again. I think I'm going to just dab in as well with the ultramarine blue, and that'll give me a little bit of variety, a little bit of shade, particularly underneath. Make that slightly stronger and darker to reflect some of the shadows and the fact that these twigs and branches will be silhouetted against the blue sky. But you can see how useful, how simple it is to use a sponge, a natural sponge if you can get hold of one from an art shop. If you can't, tear a piece off a synthetic sponge and pull it and twist it and tease it a bit so you get some random holes and shapes inside it, and that will do almost as well. So there we are, the sponge and the foliage.